From the New York Post. Suspect in fatal shooting of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson ID'd as Luigi Mangione, an ex-Ivy League student. Now, this story is crazy, and I want to stress, while this person has been arrested, and I believe we have images of him being brought in to court. Again, we don't know exactly if this is the guy. Even if they charged him, he's innocent until proven guilty. They say he reportedly had a 3D printed ghost gun, similar to the one used in the Wednesday morning murder, along with a silencer, a manifesto, 4 fake IDs, when he was arrested by cops. He's 26 and an anti-capitalist Ivy League graduate. Now, I will stress, Nick Sorter, tweeting, far left is identified as the suspect in the assassination of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Is anyone surprised? He's an anti-capitalist climate change activist, former Ivy League student who idolized Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, per the New York Post. Crystal Ball then says, plot twist, the United Health CEO killer was apparently a right-wing fan of Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson, Thiel, Huberman, and other right-wing, right-adjacent personalities. Silly. He also followed Ezra Klein and AOC. I'm going to say this. Right off the bat, again, stressing this is very important, okay? This person's not been charged in the assassination. I think they're being charged with having the silencer, the gun, and the fake IDs. This, for all we know, although this profile does fit the face that they revealed, it seems to be the person they were looking for at the hostel. Maybe it's someone who was given the stuff. No idea. Until it's proven, I'm going to be careful on this one. That being said, this dude's a far leftist. No question.
Clearly.
I want to stress, just because he has some writings, which we'll go over in just a second, about the Unabomber. In it, he clearly makes left-wing ideological positions, calling for violence. This is a leftist. And we can break that down, but I'll throw it to you guys so I'm not just ranting on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is probably not, the reason this probably confuses people is he's not the standard, liberal resist lib type of leftist. I mean, you could say he has some views that are third positionist or all over the political spectrum, but to label this guy some type of generic conservative right-wing guy because he, I guess, retweeted Tucker Carlson before is just ridiculous. If anything, you could say he's sort of outside the normal political spectrum, and that would be fair, but to say conservative generically, no, absolutely not. Just like how Thomas Crooks was a Trump supporter.
Exactly.
Right?
I was just going to say that. The left likes to do everything they can to distance themselves from any actual political violence.
Right.
Just like they were saying, Thomas Crooks who's the guy that was shooting at Trump. He's a Trump supporter. So they were making completely ridiculous arguments.
But they're celebrating it.
Yeah.
Taylor Lorenz.
Yeah. Okay? On one hand, he's a right winger, and then the other hand, they're celebrating it. Yeah.
Right. This is clearly so. I mean, breaking down what left and right means is okay, fine, it's loaded or whatever. But when we say left and right in a common colloquial sense, we are referring to political tribes and little else, and the manifestos of those tribes. So the right typically refers to a cohort of post-liberals, disaffected liberals, conservatives, libertarians, and anarcho-capitalist libertarian types. Just falls under libertarian. The left typically refers to anti-capitalist, environmentalists, woke, pro-trans. So if you want to make this argument of right means free market and left means centralized economy, then left and right makes no sense in any context in American political commentary. If you want to make the argument that it's fascist and communist, you're basically just saying authoritarian, and the difference being traditional worldview versus progressive worldview. In the American sense of left and right, this guy is left-wing.
Yeah, I think that for as much as in my opinion, I guess, I think that if you are an anti-capitalist or if you are against private property, those are clearly left positions. There's not a whole lot of debate about it. The idea of ending private property was one of Marx's tenets of communism. He said that you could boil his philosophy down into one sentence, which is the abolition of private property.
Take a look at this. It says, the suspect nabbed in the killing is an anti-capitalist Ivy League grad who liked online quotes from Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and see that a manifesto, these parasites had it coming. Tech whiz Luigi Mangione, 26, originally from Towson, MD. Wow, that's crazy. That's not that far from here. Apparently hated the medical community because of how it treated his sick relative, sources say. Now, the crazy thing is, we've also seen rumors that he suffered an injury either surfing or hiking. And some people are posting that he had a back injury a few months ago and then fell off and no one heard from him until he appeared now. No idea.
You know, I also think, like, I don't understand the obsession, really, to make this so political to begin with, because I don't know if that was the initial accusation of conservatives that, like, oh, this guy's a leftist. I think it's generally understood this is probably someone who is scorned over the healthcare system for a specific reason. And even, like, I think the need to even politicize it is kind of ridiculous. I mean, obviously, people are going to be interested in what he said or whatever, but I don't even see the relevance, honestly, to some degree.
I mean, I slightly disagree. The question was it politically or ideologically motivated? And it is not so like I was saying, like if we want to be honest, the first thing we have to do is define left and right, because people use them to mean different things. It typically refers to the tribes in American political, in the political sphere. So often it does refer to a largely traditional versus a largely progressive worldview. It does in somewhat overlap with smaller government, less regulation, and larger government, more regulation, but it's not absolute. So it's generally this amorphous structure. The reason why I think it's important to draw the distinction here is that the quote unquote right, as we see it today, seeks to bring about change through voting. Only January 6th did we see a massive riot. Then you've got what was that other riot in the 2000s? What was it called? Let me look it up. And I don't even know if it's right wing.
I don't know of any riots.
This was the Brooks Brothers riot, a demonstration led by Republican staffers at a meeting in Miami-Dade, and they called it the Brooks Brothers riot. And I don't even know if it actually counts as a riot, to be completely honest. It's like the closest you're going to get. So the right in this country tends to be families, suit-wearing individuals. They don't have time to go do these things. They tend to have kids, not always. They're going to show up to community meetings, banging on their fist on a podium or a lectern, being like, "We demand change." And the right manifesting power is best exemplified by Donald Trump and the Republicans sweeping, as we just saw. That is, all of these people being like, "This country is going to end unless we do something." What can we do? What did they do? Scott Pressler registered voters, cleaned up streets. People went around and knocked on doors. People went online and complained. The left kills people, burns things down, firebombs things, gives out Molotovs, advocates for revolution and destruction. That's what this guy was doing. He has a post where he was commenting on Goodreads Ted Kaczynski's manifesto, where he literally says, and I'm not going to quote the whole thing because I don't think it should be repeated, but he basically says that peaceful protest does not work. Ted Kaczynski, it's fascinating how he insults Kaczynski for killing innocent people, but then goes on to say he praises violence and the use of violence. And now they're saying they found a manifesto. It is not of the political right in this country to violate the norms, the rules, the regulations to a great degree, and to advocate for violence. The right in this country is actually rather, the joke we make about the Republican Party is slow down there, Democrats. They don't want to step out of line. They don't want to overly wield power. Even Donald Trump in his first term did not go after Hillary Clinton or any of these people. He thought he could play ball. The people on the right genuinely believe as long as we can control the power structures, we'll be okay. While the left shot a guy, BLM riots, go out in the street. They burn things down. They attack people. 30 plus deaths in the BLM riots in 2020. This is their MO. So this guy, anti-capitalist, climate change activist, complaining about the healthcare industry and CEOs, while leftists online are cheering for him, I think it's important to draw the distinction of if we as a culture allow that to persist unchecked, these are the things you get. And the right, as we see today, which includes a lot of former liberals like myself, are saying, we don't want violence. We don't want death. We want to come together, elect a Donald Trump and populist, conservative Republican types. Look, we're big fans of Thomas Massey because we're more libertarian and liberty-minded than anything else. But the right in this country is screaming and rabbling and banging on the table for political structural change, not through violence.
At the moment, I think it's because the right, as we know it in the United States, has adopted a moderate stance over the last 4 years.
That's because, as I described already, the left and the right, as we describe it, are terms to describe the American political climate. So when we say right, we are referring to post-liberals, disaffected liberals, libertarians, and conservatives.
In the United States? You mean?
In the United States.
Because like the Nazis we were talking about before the show would have been considered right. The fascists, Mussolini's fascists would have been considered right. And they were very evil.
Now, what does right mean in your context? It's not the same thing as what I'm saying.
It's more of an economic thing. I think of it in terms of like fiscal economic, like economic conservatism.
The Nazis had a command economy.
That is true.
The Nazis didn't have the same kind of centralized economy as the communists, but they used social order and pressure to maintain the economy that they wanted.
And man, the terms left and right are too diachromatic to.
That's why I said in the United States, left and right is a reference to these two political camps. So the Nazis maintained control of the economy through the fear of what the Nazis would do to you if you weren't just a part of the crowd.
And through lying. They told everyone they were building highways and cars and they were spending it on tanks.
The famous line was they would go to a steel factory and say, "Why aren't you producing steel for the movement?" And then people would immediately be like, I get the idea. So it wasn't that there was an on the books penalty for not producing steel. It was this is the way, you better do it. Or that's very much what the woke do. Whereas the communists were like, write down in the book what you're doing or we'll send you to the gulag. So there's still command centralized economies. But anyway, I digress. Yeah. That's why I'm like, when Crystal Ball says he was right wing or right adjacent, I'm like, listening to Jonathan Haidt's research on thought processes and structures is not right wing.
Yeah, I think calling it left or right is a little bit presumptuous. Really, I mean, the guy would seem all around that, but he seems down. If you're looking at that 4-quadrant situation, he looks like anarchistic, like he was anti-establishment.
Yeah. And that's sort of my point with this is not that there's not a political undertone to what happened. Let me, I guess, clarify what I was saying earlier. It's more so that, like, I think it's wild how you have, like, a generic woke Democrat trying to point at a generic MAGA supporter and say, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. When in reality, you look at this guy's political views, I think I agree with you, Tim, that they are left-wing coded, but it's a lot more complicated and I guess philosophical what he believed than the average just like Democrat on Facebook.
For sure.
That's not who really did this attack.
Yeah.
Either, you know?
His motivations, like, he takes climate change very seriously. Mm-hmm. He takes the healthcare industry very seriously, much more than I know. People just generally don't like the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
But again, I stress, the right is basically like, oh, if we keep voting, we'll make a difference. Hey, this time it did.
Yeah, it does.
And that's the point. The left are the ones. This guy literally wrote in his manifesto, which I'm like, not manifesto, but in his review of the Unabomber, he says that we're animals and any animal on the planet would fight to the death seeing what was going on, but we're cowards or blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. That is not a right-wing position.
Sounds like it's out of a manifesto.
Right? When the left says the right are fascists because they follow Donald Trump, the leader, that's a really good example. Believe that, fine. What you're basically saying is that the average person looks to the leader of their tribe. The far right is Trump's in charge, we'll do what he says. It's like, okay, these are not the kind of people who are going to try and overthrow the government.
And also, far anything, like people that are obsessed sycophants could be considered extremist right, extremist left. The people that voted for whoever the Democratic Party fed them were extremists in that direction. The people that will say yes to anything Donald Trump proposes, even if it's throwing people in prison for burning the American flag, far right, that's an extremist in that direction. So you got to be critical of your leaders to not become an extremist. So I think this guy would be considered an extremist, and I call him left or right. I'm just surprised Sorter did that. Nick, as far as I know, is usually pretty. I mean, maybe he's got a point. But Crystal Ball seemed totally off base calling that. Anyway,
if you look at his Twitter account, you can see that he's like commenting on Tucker Carlson and Jonathan Haidt. He makes a comment about Tucker Carlson. He says that brutalist architecture is demoralizing to people or something to that effect. And he says Tucker Carlson is right. And I'm like, having the capacity to agree with a correct point doesn't make you necessarily left or right wing.
Right.
You can be a far leftist. Ben Shapiro can sit here and talk about how we shouldn't overtax corporations and overregulation is bad for business or whatever. I don't know what his position is exactly. And then if a leftist said something like, we need to find a solution to the fact that children die of the flu and people are dying on the street, Ben's going to say, I agree. That doesn't make him a leftist, right? So this guy saying Tucker has a point that brutalist architecture is demoralizing. It's this blank slab. It's not good. Doesn't mean right wing anything. You're insane if you don't agree with the good points someone makes, if they're good points, just because you're like they're a leftist or a right winger.
Well, I mean, look, I don't think that the architecture preferences by people are a good barometer as to right or left.
But that's what they're saying.
I know they're ridiculous.
Yeah,
but
because if you take your average like liberal to Barcelona or some city with very old architecture, they're gonna like it. Does that mean they're right wing? You know, it's a ridiculous argument.
I was getting a handful of people that were commenting that swore up and down that they were not of the left, but they were still saying that they thought what happened was a good thing, that it was time to put these CEOs on notice and et cetera and stuff like that.
Insane.
It's clearly insane. And I think that if you take that position, then you're not just I do think that it is fair to say you're not just right or left, you're anti-society, right? Because if you live in a society where you have vigilantes going out and doing this kind of stuff, you end up with just more police, you end up with more government influence, you end up with less freedom. And I don't see how anyone could actually want that result when they're saying, look, these CEOs are a bad thing and they're not taking care of people the way they need to. And the solution, it will end up being, just more policing, more government, more authoritarianism. It just doesn't make any sense.
It gives the elites an excuse to consolidate even more power.
It's an example of anarchy when it's chaotic and evil. Like, anarchy is not always bad. Sometimes you want no rules in the system so that the system can flourish. Like with farming, you don't necessarily want, you need to be loose in some systems. But this is an example of when anarchism is bad, and it can make authoritarianism go haywire if it's not kept in check.
And look, I totally understand.
This is not anarchy, though.
He just totally threw the rules out the window and was like, we must take it into our own. Vigilantism is anarchy.
Anarchy, if you go to ask Michael Malice about this, he's going to tell you're wrong.
Ooh, I'd love to have Michael Malice on again.
Anybody who truly understands what anarchy means, it does not mean using violence. Violence is the antithesis of anarchy. Anarchy means without authority. To walk up to a man with a weapon and end his life is the exertion of ultimate authority over someone else because your ideas are better. That is the antithesis of what anarchy is. So true anarchists, not these far-left whack jobs who call themselves anarchists because they're not, they're tankies, they're communists. Real anarchy is people discussing with each other and making agreements, sometimes begrudgingly and sometimes happily.
Well, this guy quoting the laws of the jungle and things like that is anarchy. Like, animal strong, animal eat, animal destroy. That's anarchy.
That's not anarchy.
That's like total no law, no rule, no authority. The strongest take. Like, that's anarchy.
All right, let's define authority.
The authorship of power within a system.
So what say you, Phil?
I assume authority would be the rightful or correct distribution of power.
And what do you think?
Authority? Probably the ability to command your will on someone under the threat of violence.
You have the closest to the dictionary definition.
Yeah.
It is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. A man walking up to another man and putting bolts in his back is the ultimate exercise of authority. It is not anarchy. Anarchy would be a conversation where neither asserts authority over each other, neither exerts power over each other, and they have a discussion and then come to terms. So these far leftists have taken the term anarchy, and this is offensive to me, and I'm not an anarchist. But if you actually talk to real anarchists, they'll tell you every political ideology has the means for violence to come about what they want, but it is antithetical to the idea of an anarchist society that is trying to have a discussion to arbitrarily decide to exert the ultimate authority, which is to take someone's life by force unilaterally.
But the thing about having a discussion until you find terms is sometimes you don't find terms.
That's right. Anarchy is impossible. That's why I'm not an anarchist. And there's a lot of anarchists who would argue why I'm wrong, but I think they're wrong.
But to say anarchy is impossible kind of violates the definition because you have to create a possible situation in order to define it.
Anarchy is impossible. The reason why is in history there have been a few short-lived anarchist societies. Most notably is the Catalonia anarchist commune or whatever they call it. And the problem is when no one has the authority to exert any power or direct obedience, those that do crush them instantly.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's what always will happen is somebody will take authority. So in some systems that you want to refer to as anarchist, maybe just bringing that word up is a mistake. Maybe it's totally impossible to say the antithesis, anti-authority is non-existent. There will always be some authority.
Right.
I mean, you look at the Chaz and the Chop; those are supposed to be, the autonomous zone and stuff like that. As soon as the police were who were ostensibly the authority before the establishment of the Chaz or whatever, as soon as they said they weren't going to go in, gangs became the authority. I think there were people walking around with guns and stuff.
I think the distinction is important because far leftists, if you go to the subreddit like r/anarchism, it is not anarchists. They know very little. They've perverted the writers and philosophies of anarchy, and they advocate for centralized authoritarian power to subject people to their will. They hold fringe cultural leftist views. They are tankies. They claim they're not, and they claim they hate tankies.
Tanky, that's a Soviet?
Far left communist authoritarian.
What does that come from? This is a little bit of a side.
Stalin, right?
Tanky,
Presumably.
the term
Tanky
tanky.
from, when the communists rolled tanks into Hungary to put down the uprising or whatever,
And people cheered it on, and they were considered tankies. Like,
well, if you were a person that says yes, the communists were right to put that down and roll the tanks in, and they were like, okay, well, those
like
are
violent communists or tankies.
tanks. They're authoritarian communists.
Go to r/anarchism on Reddit, and they're celebrating this. And then the actual people I know who are like anarchist scholars, and I'd be curious to talk to Michael Malice about it because he certainly knows way more about anarchist philosophy than I do. All the people I've known going back 15 years or so who have been to these protests are like, so for example, during the wave of protests of the 2010s, I was friends with a handful of anarchists who are just like, we utterly despise the far left. We despise the black bloc protesters. We despise Antifa because they're the ones who make it impossible for anarchist organizing, because the media uses that as a symbol of anarchy and then tells everybody anarchy means this. And it's like going around and setting fire. Like if a group of people goes to your house and threatens to burn your house and let you do what they say, that's called fascistic, or it's called authoritarian, or it's called communist. It's not anarchy. They're asserting power of force over you to harm you. That's what totalitarians do.
But I guess the argument is under anarchy, eventually those are the things that happen, right? So maybe that's why they're associated with anarchy, is because eventually, there's no authority, someone takes the authority. So maybe that's the association.
I mean, a power vacuum.
But it also implies that I agree with you to a certain extent, but many of these anarchists believe in being armed to the teeth and defending their own property. So the idea that someone else could come and threaten you, it's a question of, yes, bad people exist and people try to act with the power to subjugate you. And do you have the power to defend yourself? I'm not an anarchist.
Anarchy is kind of like a house of cards. Like, it's very vulnerable. And that's why I think people are afraid of it, because if someone does decide to seize power, it's just basically the whole tower comes crumbling down. There's no more anarchy. It's full authoritarian, strongest ones in charge now.
So I'm going to read this one super chat real quick before we jump to the next story, because it is the speculation as to what happened. The killer had bad back pain, turned 26, hence he lost his parents' insurance, got delusional, and killed the CEO instead of finding a job. Don't overthink this. I've also heard that there's so many rumors, man. We don't know.
Yeah.
Some are claiming that because of the back pain, he started taking psychedelics because he was trying to relieve himself, that he had problems with getting the surgery paid for. He got radicalized, took various drugs to alter his mind because of the pain or for whatever, and then came to some diluted reality. Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.